Hello everyone and welcome to Total Quilter Monthly for July 2018. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator. And in this month's episode we're going to be talking about basic appliques, and then next month we're going to follow it up with some more advanced applique techniques. So let's go ahead and get right into it here. So if you haven't done it already, you want to open up Total Quilter, and what we're going to cover this month also will apply to MDQ2, so if you have that, you can also follow along. If you haven't done it already, go ahead and start a new design window by clicking this icon right here, the new design window. Now I don't have my grid showing at the moment. If you prefer to have your grid showing, that's completely up to you. It won't make any real difference for what we're going to cover in this lesson. The one thing you might want to do though is set your thread palette down here to Floriani Cotton. And what you want to do is come right here and click Select Thread Chart. And you want to come up to Floriani Cotton and select that. And that will give you this thread chart. Now we are not using this thread chart because we expect you to actually stitch these things out with Floriani Cotton. It's just that this has just a small limited palette, so it's a little bit easier to find and select colors rather than dealing with the whole 360 color palette that we have in Floriani Poly. And then the last thing I want to talk about is your mouse, and today we're going to be doing some clicking and maybe some right clicking. And when I want you to just click, that's a normal left click of the mouse, I will tell you to left click or just click. And if I want you to right click, I will specifically say right click of the mouse. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Let's just talk about appliques in general for a moment. So as you know, appliques are items that we embroider that have a piece of fabric covering the main area, and then they are tacked down along the edges, and the edge usually covered with some kind of a stitch. Usually it's a satin type stitch or sometimes a blanket stitch, and with the Floriani software you have the ability to put in a decorative motif stitch if you so desire. So we'll look at all of those options. In Total Quilter and my decorative quilter, and from now on I'm just going to say Total Quilter, but you know I also mean my decorative quilter too. When you make an applique from scratch, there are a couple of ways you can do it. One is to use the line drawing tool. The other would be to use one of the built-in shapes like a rectangle or ellipse or whatever. And then you could also use the custom shapes. So basically where you want to start with any of these tools is you're going to start with a piece of artwork. Now it's also possible to convert a fill type outline or a run stitch outline into an applique in the software. We're not going to cover that in this lesson though. We're just going to assume you're going to start with a piece of artwork. The easiest way to visualize what we're talking about is to use one of the custom shapes here. So that's that icon right here with the little folder and the little flower in the center. When you click it, you're going to get the custom shapes menu, and you can select one of these shapes, and we're just going to use this bunny right here. And so that bunny comes in. Now this is artwork, also known as vectors. So this is an outline. It comes in filled, but if you don't want to see the fill, if you want to actually see the outline, you can uncheck fill over here in the properties and click apply, and you can see the outline of the bunny here. And an applique, as far as the software concerned, is based on a line. Now that line can either represent a closed shape like we have here with the bunny, or it can just be a single line or an arc or whatever shape you want that to be. But the applique starts out as a line, and it's defined by that line, and then we build our various stitches around that line. So underneath it, there's always that line. So that's kind of an important concept to remember, and we'll be touching more on that in our second installment next month in advanced appliques. But here's our bunny line, and we're going to convert this into an applique. And the way we do it is with this applique one click down here. So this will, if you click it, it will take any piece of artwork or a stitch outline that is created with an underlying piece of artwork, and it will convert it into an applique. So in order to do that, we're going to use, like I said, this artwork, but as it came in, it's fairly small. If we come over here to our properties box, look at our transform, it's about 3.5 inches tall, which isn't too bad, but we have some fiddly bits and little pieces going on in here, and so for an applique to cut all of those, it can be a little bit difficult. So let's actually make it bigger. We're going to transform it. Before we transform it, we don't want to warp the bunny, so we're going to leave our maintain aspect ratio turned on, and I am in inches right over here, and you can change to millimeters if you like, but I'm going to leave it in inches. And we're going to make this bunny 6 inches high. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in a 6 over the height. And when I do that, you can see my width control changes so that the bunny stays in proportion, and that's what this checkbox and maintain aspect ratio is all about. And when I click apply, our bunny's going to get much bigger. So now this is a good size to make a decent size applique out of. So once we have our artwork selected, which I have here, all we need to do to convert this into an applique is come down here to our applique one click and simply click it, and we have an applique. Now, what is going on with this applique? What are the parts of this? So let's use our slow redraw tool up here to see what the parts are. So I'm just going to click it, and I'm going to start to move it. Now, before I move, and I'm going to click and drag this. So I'm holding down the button on my mouse here. So if I click and drag it, I will start to actually trace those stitches. All right, now you saw the green outline of the bunny still there, so I'm going to back up, go back and select it, because one of the things that Total Quilter and my Decorative Quilter do is when you convert from artwork into an applique, it's not really a conversion. It's actually a copy and convert. So it leaves the original artwork there, so that outline of the bunny, the artwork, is still here. Now we actually don't need it, so I'm going to delete it. I'm going to do that by right clicking on it and selecting delete. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. That just leaves me with the applique. So now when I go to my slow redraw tool, you'll see that there's nothing there. And as I start to click and drag this slider along, you will see it draw the stitches. So I'm just going to slowly drag it along. And so what the first stitch that comes out of this is actually a placement line. So you would hoop up your fabric, or your quilt block, or whatever you're doing, and it would stitch out this placement line showing you where to put your fabric down in the hoop. And then the machine would stop because it's going to change color. You can see it changes to this slate blue here after it did the wine color. And it is going to, since it switches color, if you have a normal machine, it's going to stop and ask you for the next thread. So that stop is on purpose, which is why we switch colors, so that you have a chance now to put the fabric down. So you put your fabric, make sure it's covering the placement line, and then you would stitch out the next color, which would be what we call the tack down line. And you can see that that is slightly inset from our placement line, so it goes all the way around and starts to, and tacks that fabric down. Now once we've tacked the fabric down, it's going to stop again because it's going to once again switch colors, and it's going to switch now to this light brown color, and it is going to give us a chance to take the hoop out of the machine, get our applique scissors, and get in here and cut along this outline close to the tack down line. We want to get as close to the tack down line as we can, because then what's going to happen after we've done that and we put the hoop back in the machine is the steel or satin stitch is going to come along and cover up that raw edge of the fabric. And so that's how we do a traditional machine applique. Now let's take a look at what's going on here. I'm going to reselect my bunny. I'm going to get out of slow redraw mode, reselect my bunny, and it looks pretty good, but you see in here I've got a real sharp point here. Now if I like the way that looks, I can go ahead and leave it, but this gives us a chance to look at some of the controls over here in our properties box. So here's our properties box, and we have our applique type. We'll come back to that. we have the width of our satin stitch because our applique type is a default to a satin. And we have our applique density. So again, that's the density of the satin stitch. We have the inset. Now the inset is based on that original artwork line, or what became the placement line. So right now it's set to 50%. That means that this stitch is balanced 50% along that placement line. So it's going to cover it 50% onto the fabric, 50% off of the fabric. And usually you can leave that alone, but if you want it closer in, you can change this inset. If you want it further out, you can change that inset. But what I wanted to show you here was this button right here called the corner type. Now corner type allows you to change what that, whoops, I clicked by mistake, I didn't mean to, I'm going to reselect sew placement. Corner type is set to sharp by default, but you can click the drop down arrow and you can change it to beveled corners or round corners. So I'm going to change it to round corners and click apply, and when I do that you can see how it rounds that corner off in here, so it's not as steep anymore and not as pointy. It looks a little bit better in my opinion, so I'm going to leave that there. So this is the basic way that you create an applique. One of my other favorite things that you can do with this is that if you want to preview what your fabric is going to look like inside this applique, you can click the fabric button right here and it's going to bring up your fabric library. Now the fabric library that comes with the software is pretty sparse, and I'm going to scroll down to start showing you some of those fabrics. So here's some of the fabrics that come with it, and they're really, to be honest, not all that exciting set of fabrics. But the good news is right up here at the very top there's an add button, and this add button lets you add a picture. So that would be a scan or a picture of a fabric that you already own. So you can scan it with your scanner, you can take a picture of it with your digital camera, or you can do what I like to do, which is go out to the fabric manufacturers' websites and get the JPEGs off of their websites. That a lot of them will have a place where you can download the swatches. You can do that and bring them in using the add button, and then you'll have the actual fabric patterns. So these are some fabric patterns that I got from a website. So let's make our bunny pink. So I'm going to use this pink fabric right here and select it and say OK. And so it's going to show me what that pink fabric is going to look like in that applique. Now this is just for visual reference. It really doesn't do anything. It just lets us see what this bunny would look like with real fabric. Now the last couple things I want to go over with this is how you would adjust the color of the finishing stitch. The color of the underlying stitches doesn't matter all that much because they're going to get covered up. The idea is that the color is going to switch in order to stop the machine, but you don't really have to actually change the thread color. So you would load whatever your finishing stitch thread color is going to be, and then you would just stitch out the placement line in that color. The machine would stop. You just wouldn't do anything with the thread. You'd put your fabric down, stitch out the tack down line, etc. But what the finishing stitch looks like and the color is kind of important. So what I'm going to do is, with it selected, I'm actually going to click off it so we can see what color it is, and that finishing stitch came out that brown color, which doesn't look all that exciting with the pink bunny. So I'm going to change it to a color that makes more sense, and I'm going to use the wine color here. You can see I've already got that color in the applique. It's the first color that's going to stitch out, which is going to be the placement line. But what I want to do is change the brown color. Now, when I select an applique object, and I'll just expand over here in my sequence view so you can see, it just says applique. And I can go ahead and expand that so I can see which color is which. So color number 1 is always going to be your placement. Color number 2 is going to be your tack down. Color number 3 is always going to be your finish line. Okay, so if I select it, I can't actually change these colors right here. Okay, it looks like I can, but I really can't. So whichever one of these I select, I'm going to select that applique. And when I click a color to change it to, like let's change it to this wine color here. If I click that, what's going to happen is I'm going to get this little fly out box here, and it's going to ask me, do I want to assign this color to color number 1, color number 2, or color number 3. Now, as we discussed earlier, color number 1 is always going to be your placement, color number 2 is your tack down, color number 3 is going to be your finishing stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and select color number 3, and now you can see over here my third color is back to wine, and if I click off it, you'll see that I've got that color now as my finishing stitch. So that's the basics of how to create an applique in the software. And like I said, you can do this with a built-in shape. You can use any outline shape that is built into the software. You can draw it freehand or with the tools we give you. You can use one of the built-in shapes like a rectangle or an ellipse here, or one of the custom shapes here. Or you can load in any outline file that would be like a vector type file. And the most common format you'll find out there would be SVG. Some of you that have Brother Scan and Cuts might also be familiar with the FCM format. If you want to get one of those designs in so you can convert it into an applique, the way you would do that is you'd come here to File and then do Import Artwork. So Import Artwork would bring in a vector file and allow you then to convert it into an applique. All right, so that's the basics. But there's one more topic I want to go over in today's session, and that is, what if you don't want to cut this in the hoop by hand? What if you want to cut it more conveniently outside of the hoop, either with a scissors or even better with a digital cutter like a Scan and Cut or a Silhouette or anything like that? So in My Decorative Quilter 2 and in Total Quilter, we give you a really cool tool to do that with, and it's called the Cut Preview tool. So the way you use it is you would select your applique. You don't need to worry about which part you're going to select, and you would come up here to this icon right here, which is called Cut Preview. And when you click it, it's going to take the underlying outline and open it up in a brand new design window. And what you're seeing here is just the outline of the way this fabric would cut. Now, you're not seeing the actual fabric, but if you wanted to, you could select this. It's just a piece of artwork, so you could select it. You could come over here and use that same fabric button to fill it. But again, it's just for your visual reference. It really doesn't make any difference. But this is the exact size that it is over here for this applique. All right, so what we can do with this now is we can do one of two things. We can either send this file to a digital cutter, so we can cut it super precisely and super easily, and we'll go over that in a second. The other option you can do is you can use a product like our Applique Wonder or Applique, and Applique is from the Quilter Select line. They're really very, very similar materials. There are some differences, but for our discussion here today, we're not going to worry about those differences. They both work in the same fashion, and that is you would fuse it to the back of your fabric. You would then put that down onto your cutter mat, and you would either cut it with a digital cutter, or you would print this before fusing it onto the fabric, and then you would cut with the scissors around it. The idea is that you can cut it out in the air and not have to worry about getting down inside the hoop and cutting it, and you don't have to worry about getting close to the stitches or whatever, because it's all just perfect right here. So either way you want to do it, you can. The only difference is whether you're going to trace this using a digital printer, or you are going to actually cut it directly with a digital cutter. You could also print this on a piece of paper if you don't want to load your applique material into the printer first and print on it. You could just print it out on a piece of paper and then literally trace it onto the back of the Applique Wonder. So let's talk about doing it on Applique Wonder first. So what you would normally do is you would print this at regular size onto the back side of Applique Wonder, and then you would fuse it onto the fabric, and then using that printed line you would cut around it. So if you're going to do that, you don't want to waste a lot of ink printing the fill here. So what you would want to do is you would want to turn off the fill and click Apply, and you do that by clicking this fill box here, and oh, we got fabric in there, so I'm going to select None for the fabric, It did bring the fabric along with it from the design. And now we just have a nice outline. If you want this a little bit bolder, you can change the pen width. All right, but if you do that, you're going to get a little bit less accurate cut. But if you want it a little bit easier to see, you can change the pen width. So for example, you could change it to 1 millimeter from 0, and now you have a thicker line to cut with. Now you wouldn't do this if you were going to cut it with a digital cutter. This is only if you're going to print it or trace it. You might want that little bit fatter pen width. You might also want to change the color to something that's easier to see. So we could come in here and we could click black, and now when you print it, it's going to print with a little more contrast. Now, one other important thing is that when you print this, and we're going to go over exactly how to print it in just a second, but when you print this, you're going to be printing it on the back side of the applique, which means that this needs to be printed in reverse. And so what you need to do is, before you print it, you want to come up here to the flip horizontal icon and click it. Now we have reversed it, so when we print it, it'll be on the back side of the applique, and when we cut it, it'll actually end up being the right direction. And if I didn't explain it, I'm sorry, but the back side of the applique wonder has a piece of release paper that we're going to print on, but then when you peel that off after you've done your cutting, then it exposes a sticky layer that makes it real easy to stick down your applique in the placement line in the hoop and continue on. So that's what you need to do now to actually print it. You're going to come up here to the print button, the print preview button, and click it. And when you do that, you're going to get a print dialog here. Now you can see that I actually don't see anything. Now why is that? That's because your settings are very important here. So if I come here to my settings, I want to make sure that I have artwork selected. If I don't have artwork selected, I won't see anything because all we're showing here is artwork. I really do not need the crosshair for this, but I want to make sure that I also have print actual size selected. So the important things when you print on the back of the Applique Wonder is you want to do print actual size and print artwork. You do not want to have print in one page, because that's going to try to put a whole bunch of other stuff here, and that means that the size of your applique can't be as big. It doesn't matter if you're in stitch mode or not. You can leave it selected, but we are not going to be seeing any stitches because there aren't any that we are printing right now. So if I say OK, and now you can see I've got rid of my crosshair, and now you can see that I have my bunny all set to print. So all I got to do now is click the print button here and send it to my printer when I print on the back side of the Applique Wonder. Or also, once again, I could print this out on a standard white piece of paper and then trace the bunny onto the back of the Applique Wonder. Either way, though, you want to make sure it's reversed. So I'm not going to print this, but I'm just going to click close and come back here. So I just want to go back to our design, and I want to talk about how you would do this if you were using a digital cutter. So let's go ahead and start from scratch. I'm actually going to delete this design window because I don't need it anymore. I could actually have used it, but we're going to start out with the original again, just like we would if we were going to send it to a digital cutter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one of two things. I have the option, if this is my only thing in my design, if this is it, I can come up here to File and I can click Export Artwork. So I can do that right from here, and it knows to just give me that outline just like it knew what to give me for the cut preview window. So you could do it directly from here. The important thing though is if you have a lot of stuff going on and you don't want to mess with the stitches part of the design, you don't want to come directly from here. You want to go to cut preview. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to kind of cancel that by clicking off it. I'm going to go to cut preview once again. It's going to do the same thing as before, give us our bunny, but in this instance we are not going to reverse it, because when we cut our fabric on the digital cutter, we're going to cut from the top side. There's no tracing, so we want our image to be facing the correct direction. So we're not going to flip it over. We do probably want to take off the fill. Most of your digital cutters would go ahead and just cut the outline, but just to be safe, we're going to take the fill off. We're going to take and click none for the fabric and just take that outline. Again, you could change the pen width here. It won't matter one whit if you do or not, so you may as well just leave it alone. And now that you have this nice clean bunny here, you can come up here to say File and Export Artwork, and when you do that, you're going to have a choice of some file types to export to. You can export to SVG, which most of the digital cutters can read. You have HPGL, which is the PLT format. That's the really old cutter format that a lot of cutters still can read. And you have FCM, which is for the Brother Scan and Cut machine. So that will read it directly. But Scan and Cuts these days, especially if you've updated your firmware, can also read SVG files. And you also have the choice of an AI file, which is Adobe Illustrator. And that would be if you'd want to bring it into that program. If you don't have that program, then don't worry about that. If you have that program, you do know all about this, so I don't have to explain it to you. Okay, so that's how you would do it. You would just save that file, and then you would take that into your digital cutting software or put it on a stick and give it to your digital cutter, and it would cut out this outline. Again, before you do that, you're going to take your Applique Wonder or Applistick material, fuse it onto the back of your applique fabric, stick it down to the mat, making sure that you don't peel off the backing paper. You want to stick it down and then cut your applique out and then peel off the backing paper and stick it down in the hoop. All right, so that is basic appliques and how you do them with either My Decorative Quilter 2 or Total Quilter. So I want to thank you for watching this month's video. I want to invite you to come back next month, and next month, like I said, we are going to cover some more advanced applique concepts. So come on back next month in August 2018 for that video. In the meantime, have fun with your software.